How did a humble church team, founded 144 years ago to divert young people away from crime and feed the poor, become one of the biggest football clubs in the world, backed by oil capital? Manchester was the heart of the Industrial Revolution. It was the first industrial city in history. The transport network, the population explosion, the textile workshops all around, the factory smoke filling the sky, and the wave of technological progress enveloping the city, the life of working class was terrible. The average of life expectancy in the city was only 26 years. The laborer's family lived in a single room, sharing a house with several other families, so to speak. When they died, they were buried in mass graves. Many workers died before they reached their 20s due to unsafe working conditions. In addition, tens of thousands of Irish peasants fled to Manchester as a result of Irish potato famine. The atmosphere was now ripe for ethnic and sectarian tensions. The city was unable to accommodate more people. Disease, misery, death, and crime were pouring out of every corner of the city. Epidemics spread like the wind. Social problems in the city accumulated like a mountain. Gangs of knife-wielding youths, known as scuttlers, targeted each other and innocent people, leaving the streets of Manchester in anarchy. Manchester was the ugly face of modernism. The only structures that tried to remedy the situation were a few religiously motivated church associations. These provided the needy with schooling, food, and clothing that the state did not provide. One of these associations belonged to St. Mark's Church in the Gorton area. The rector of the church, Arthur Connell, set up a relief network that distributed bread, soup, and coal to the poor in the neighborhood. At the same time, Arthur Connell's daughter Anna was concerned about the gangs of stray youths in the town. Her aim was to encourage young people to take up sport to reduce crime in the area. Although a cricket team was set up for this purpose, the sport could only be played during the warmer months and did not offer young people the opportunity to take part in this activity on a regular basis. In response, Anna Connell organized meetings and made a request for a club that would offer regular sporting opportunities. In 1880, church leaders William Beast Rowe and Thomas Goodbehere founded a football club, St. Mark's, to provide this opportunity. The team, which played its first match on November 19, 1880, and consisted of working-class youths aged 15 to 20, lost 2-1 to another church team from Macclesfield. Exactly 1 year after their first match, St. Mark's played Newton Heath, Lancashire and Yorkshire Railway and lost 3-0. The special feature of this match was that it was the first derby played between Manchester City and Manchester United, which was a railway team at that time. In 1884, the club was renamed Gorton AFC, and the club, which was orientated towards sporting rather than religious aims, participated in the local cups in the city following year. In 1887, the club moved to a new ground at Hyde Road and renamed Ardwick AFC and built a permanent stadium for the first time. Gradually, Ardwick became prominent in the town and attracted a significant number of supporters, and the club began to pay its players, moving from amateurism to professionalism. The club also extended its scouting network to Scotland. Ardwick, who built a strong squad through his scouting network and won the Manchester Cup in succession in 1891 and 1892, joined the Football Alliance, the second most important football organization in English football, thanks to this success. In 1892, the Football Alliance merged with the Football League, the most important league in the country, and Ardwick was placed in the second division. Financial difficulties in the 1893-1894 season led to organization within the club, and Ardwick was incorporated as Manchester City. By now the club had become one of the biggest in England, attracting around 20,000 fans to Hyde Road. This was due in no small part to the growing success on the pitch. 1899 was the date when Manchester City finished as champions of the second division and moved up to the first division. In 1904, Manchester City became the biggest team in England by defeating Bolton Wanderers in the FA Cup final and became the first team in the city to win a major trophy. This stability, which could have lasted for years, exploded with the match-fixing and illegal payment scandal. In the 1904-1905 season, the last matches of the First League were being played. Manchester City had to beat Aston Villa to become champions. However, they were disappointed to lose 3-2 in this match and dramatically lost the league to Newcastle United. After the match, Aston Villa captain Alec Leake revealed that City star Billy Meredith had offered him £10 to sell the game. The federation then banned Meredith from football for a year. When Manchester City did not pay Meredith's salary, Meredith started to speak. At that time, clubs could pay a player a maximum salary of £4 and it was forbidden to exceed this. According to Meredith's testimony, Manchester City paid players differently every month in order to exceed this limit and attract bigger players, like a food allowance. When this came to light, the FA found that all City players had been paid in this way and banned triumphant manager Tom Maley from football for life. 17 Manchester City players were banned from football until 1907. Manchester City have started auctioning players. The club's legendary squad was disbanded and the period of steady rise was over. Many players were snapped up by Manchester United and formed the basis of the future champions. It was a turning point in United's history. Manchester City, which could not achieve success for a long time with this incident, wanted a stadium that could accommodate large fan bases. Because their stadium had functioned as a horse farm when football activities stopped during World War I. Although the club wanted to share Old Trafford with Manchester United, the high rental costs forced Manchester City to build a new stadium. City then relocated from Hyde Road in the southeast of the city to the main road site in the Mass Lane area to the south. This move was reacted by many people. A few years later, a group from Manchester City even formed a new club, Manchester Central, to settle in the east, which was not represented by any football club. This club would fail and close in a few years. In the meantime, a dispute with the Gypsies who had settled on the main road land resulted in the forced expulsion of the Gypsies, and an 80,000-seat stadium was built here in 300 days. Main Road opened on August 25, 1923 with a Sheffield United match. Despite reaching the FA Cup final in 1926 with an average of 6 goals per game, Main Road did not seem to work for Manchester City, who were relegated from the First Division and lost the final against Bolton Wanderers. However, the club soon returned to the First Division and built a strong squad in the 1930s. In 1933, despite losing to Everton in another FA Cup final, City won the following year's final against Portsmouth and lifted their second trophy. In 1934, 85,000 people flocked to Main Road for the Stoke City match, breaking the club's attendance record, which is still unbroken today. In 1937, Manchester City finished as champions of the First Division for the first time in their history. This 100-goal haul would be overshadowed the next season in a very interesting way. City were the top scorers in the league that season too, but they were unbelievably relegated. This process, which was recorded as the City Syndrome, is still the only example in the history of English football where a champion team was relegated the following season. Manchester City would return to the First Division 10 years later due to the break in the leagues due to the war and the failures. The post-war period would be an interesting time for City, as the club's goalkeeper would be Bert Trautmann. Trautmann was a decorated Nazi paratrooper who had served in World War II. When he was captured by the British and later released, he decided to become a goalkeeper in England. For this reason, the German goalkeeper's transfer to City was initially met with a huge reaction from his own fans. So much so that even a protest of 20,000 people was organized against this transfer. Trautmann, who was subjected to insults in every match, was relegated with his team in his first season. In time, the German goalkeeper managed to win the fans' love with his saves. What happened in the 1956 FA Cup final would go beyond that and the subject of a story that would be like a film. Trautmann had broken his neck in a collision with the Birmingham City striker 20 minutes before the end of the match. But Manchester City had no substitutions. So Trautmann had to go with a broken neck. Trautmann, who cleared both balls that come to his goal after his neck was broken, reached a completely different level in the eyes of the fans when the 3-1 victory was dedicated to him. When Trautmann retired in 1964, having made more than 500 appearances in 15 years for Manchester City, nearly 60,000 fans saw him off. Nevertheless, Manchester City, then relegated to the Second Division, sometimes attracted less than 10,000 people to their home matches. Manchester City, which was going through the worst days of its history in this period, would came to the rescue of manager Joe Mercer and his assistant Malcolm Allison. Mercer took Manchester City back to the First League in his first season. The 1967-1968 season was one of the most dramatic seasons in the club's history. Manchester City, which entered the last week on equal points with its arch-rival, declared its second championship with a 4-3 victory over Newcastle United. Joe Mercer had reversed the club's fortunes, and he wasn't going to stop there. The following season another FA Cup title was won and Manchester City qualified for European competitions for the first time in their history. City reached the final of the European Cup Winners' Cup, eliminating Schalke, Academica, Lierse and Athletic Bilbao. Before the final, the morale was boosted with the League Cup Championship and Manchester City became the European champion by defeating the Polish team Górnik Zabrze in the Cup Winners' Cup final played on April 29, 1970. Manchester City was now beyond their dreams. Founded 90 years ago as a poor church team, 5 years ago Manchester City, which hosted 8,000 people at home matches and anchored to the lower ranks of the Second League, won 1 league, 2 cups and 1 European championships with the arrival of Joe Mercer. For top City, though, it could only go downwards from here. After the dramatic loss of the league title in the 1971-1972 season, Joe Mercer and Malcolm Allison fell out. Mercer, who also fell out with the management, left the club and Allison took his place. Manchester City were relegated in 1983. After 10 years of ups and downs, Manchester City managed to take its place in the first Premier League season in history, yet the gap between them and arch-rivals Manchester United has never been so stark. City were the poorer side of town. In the end, Manchester City were relegated again in the last week of the 1995-1996 season due to tragicomic mistake of the technical team, who miscalculated that 1 point was enough to stay in the league and had a pile-up in front of the goal. The price for this was going to be very heavy. Their life in the second division was harder than ever. Manchester City were relegated to the third division for the first time in their history in 1998. A dark cloud had descended over the club. While everyone expected them to at least finish as champions in the third division, finishing third in the league and qualifying for the playoffs added a new dimension to the frustration. In 1999, that day would be a real turning point for Manchester City as they took on Gillingham at Wembley in the third division playoff final. Either they would be stuck in the third league or they would change the fate of the whole club. It was a real match of destiny, the effects of which will last to this day. However, with 2 Gillingham goals after 82 minutes, it looked like the end of the road for City. However, an extra-time goal changed things, and City's fate was rewritten when Paul Dickhoff netted in the final attack at 90+5. Manchester City broke the deadlock on penalties after extra time, paving the way to comet their place in the Premier League in the early 2000s. The team, which consistently finished in the middle of the Premier League under Kevin Keegan, experienced a significant change in this period. In 2003, Manchester City said goodbye for the last time to Main Road, the iconic stadium used by Manchester City for 80 years. This symbolized the end of club's traditional era. City's new home was now City of Manchester Stadium. In the 2004-2005 season, Stuart Pearce was brought in charge of the team. Manchester City, who were striving to qualify for the European Cups, failed to achieve this goal by dropping points in the decisive game against Middlesbrough in the last week of the season in a strange match that was goalkeeper David James as a striker and Robbie Fowler missing a last-minute penalty. In 2007, Manchester City found itself a giant investor. Thailand's ousted Prime Minister and billionaire Thaksin Shinawatra became the owner of the club, and Sven-Göran Eriksson, a highly acclaimed coach, was brought in charge of the team. City had finally found the money. In the first transfer period, the purse strings were stretched to the limit. A total of £45 million was spent on Alano, Gedson Fernandez, Petrov, Bajanov, Garrido, Giovanni and Bianchi, most of whom would fail. The season ended with an 8-1 defeat to Middlesbrough. Eriksson was sacked and replaced by Mark Hughes despite pressure from fans who wanted him to stay. In the transfer window, Tal Ben Hayem and Sean Wright-Phillips were bought along with Vincent Kompany, who would become one of the most important players of the club in the future. In the middle of the transfer window, however, Thailand's junta government froze club owner Shinawatra's assets worth almost $700 million in the country. Manchester City then fell into an economic crisis and began to sell players in a panic. After Shinawat put the club up for sale, a consortium of billionaires and nobles from the United Arab Emirates, led by Sheikh Mansour, bought Manchester City. The purchase suddenly made Manchester City the richest football club in the world. The stadium was now called the Etihad Stadium. Manchester City, which broke the British transfer record on the very first day with its new face and talked about the cost of over £100 million for stars such as Cristiano Ronaldo and Kaká, has undoubtedly changed the course of football significantly with this path it has taken. The club brought Roberto Mancini in charge of the team in December 2009. With the signing of Mancini, star transfers come along with him. Edin Dzeko, Sergio Aguero, Mario Balotelli, David Silva, Samir Nasri, Yaya Touré, Alexander Kolarov, James Milner, Javi Garcia, and many more. Manchester City won the FA Cup in the 2010-2011 season with Mancini and won their first major trophy in 35 years, but this was not the real success City would achieve with Mancini. Because in the 2011-2012 season, Manchester City would win their first league championship after 44 years. After the parting of ways with Mancini in 2013, Brian Kidd managed the team for 2 matches. Manuel Pellegrini was then brought in charge of the team. City won the EFL and Premier League in his first season with Pellegrini. Manchester City broke the English football record by scoring 151 goals in all competitions this season. Of course, star transfers would continue under Pellegrini. Kevin De Bruyne, Raheem Sterling, Fernandinho, Nicolas Otamendi, Alvaro Negredo, and of course many more. Pellegrini led Manchester City to the semi-finals of the Champions League for the first time in their history in the 2015-2016 season. However, he finished 4th in the league with 66 points, and this was his last season at City. And perhaps one of the most important events in Manchester City's history is the appointment of Pep Guardiola as manager, because with him, City would win the Premier League for 4 years in a row and became Champions League champions in Istanbul. On February 2016, Manchester City signed a 3-year contract with Pep Guardiola. City lost 1-0 to Guardiola's former team Bayern Munich in his first friendly match as manager. Guardiola started the transfers for the championship from the goalkeeper and defense. Ederson, Kyle Walker, Danilo, Bravo, Zinchenko, then transfers to other positions continued: Leroy Sane, Bernardo Silva, Gabriel Jesus, Ilkay Gundogan, Douglas Luiz. City finished 3rd in the Premier League in Guardiola's first season. City, also eliminated in the semi-finals of the FA Cup, were eliminated in the last 16 round of the Champions League. The star transfers continued not only in this period but also in the new contracts signed at the end of 3 years, and of course, trophies and consecutive championships followed. And this is the history of Manchester City Football Club.